I'm Reverend James Caldwell. I am the director and founder of COCO, Coalition of Community Organizations. And I didn't put the information in the chat, which I will before I have to leave. I have to leave a little early. But why I'm here, it's because, as was stated by Paige and of course, Dr. Thomas, we can't win this lone wolfing. We can't achieve a goal or objective or fulfill our purpose lone wolfing. It has to be done collectively. And it has to be done, as was stated in the Jimenez principles, from the bottom up. And what I'm going to basically share tonight is my experiences as to why I am a part of the environmental justice and climate advocacy community. I grew up, as was stated previously, in Fifth Ward, and I'm a native Houstonian. I've seen the city of Houston change and grow, and I've seen communities of color neglected. It's a redundant scenario, underserved, neglected communities, but why? Why are they underserved? Why are they neglected? It's primarily because we don't have enough interest or care or concern for their issues, their problems, their concerns. And why is environmental justice important to climate? When we think in terms of environmental justice, what are we talking about actually? When we say environmental justice, what does that mean? Does that mean that in my side of town or on another side of town, it's okay to have a batch plant of petroleum, plant near me? Or is it, in some cases, as you know, about the creosote issue over at UP? Is that acceptable? Is that okay when it's all right to live on the other side and to live a quality way of life? In other words, where's the equity component attached to that? If we're sincerely concerned about our advocacy, as advocates. And that's basically what every one of us on here are, advocates, are activists. You're an activist. You're not going to sit by quietly and allow issues, situations, circumstances to take place on your watch. So you pick up the mantle, and unfortunately, they say most leaders, and I believe this, are in the back and push the crowd forward. But as an activist, you pick up the mantle and you lead the crowd. You educate them, you inform them, you guide them, you support them in their efforts to try to relieve whatever pain and suffering that they may go through. But the environmental justice movement and the climate change movement go hand in hand. You can't discuss one without the other. And I'll try to reflect that somewhat in the time that I have here. And I'm going to share some brief information here that says that the number of recorded disaster-related or related issues to weather, climate, or water hazard increased roughly by 400% in recent decades. As an example, from 711 between 1970 to 1979 to more than 3,500 between 2000 and 2009. And there were more than 3,100 disasters from 2010 to 2019. But in many ways, there's nothing natural about the level of vulnerability a community may or may not have to a disaster. That's undetermined. We don't know what that level of vulnerability is. However, we do know that it occurs and that level goes up or down based on certain factors that have been entrenched for years, if not decades, if not centuries, from racist practices of the past to present day failures in preparedness, responses, and recovery. And experts say that the poor people and poor policies and procedures have disproportionately put certain communities particularly those dominated by racial and ethnic minorities, at high risk of harm. And the growing threat of climate change only further heightens that risk. So when we think in terms of Black, brown, indigenous, unhoused, low income, disabled, LGBTQ communities, in actuality, these communities face the greater harm. And research has shown that socially vulnerable groups, including the physical disabled, or living in Houston neighborhoods that have a greater proportion of flooding during a flooding event or during a Harvey event. Predominantly Black, Hispanic, and low-income neighborhoods experience significantly higher levels of flooding and devastation. Now, growing up in Fifth Ward and living in the community itself, I experienced a lot of that devastation. And Coco itself was at the forefront of trying to assist and help. I did the mudding and gutting. I'm too old to climb up on roofs, but I was there, and it wasn't just in one area, it was all over. Now, that's an issue as far as Harvey, but when we take in terms of climate change, what caused the Harvey? And why was the effects after Harvey so detrimental to a community, the community I live in, so many others? Now, researchers also say that resources from the Center Disease Control and Prevention of Social Vulnerability Index created some maps, okay? And those maps show the level of vulnerability, and that's from the highest to the lowest. And the map shows that the worst flooding from Harvey were concentrated inside the loop or outside the loop and in areas with higher levels of vulnerability. Now, this reflects a long-standing deep divide across racist, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. It reflects a difference in resilience and recovery. Race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and immigration status, among other factors, influence a person's exposure to a disaster, their ability to recover, and their resilience. And I hope that what I'm saying here reflects a community, not just in the community that I live, but in other communities. I may be focusing on Harvey somewhat, but there are natural disasters that occur, that are man-made disasters that occur. And these can happen anywhere, in any community. And it's usually at that point when someone kind of rings the bell. And that's when people begin to listen and want to become engaged and involved, because now it's personal. It affects me. And now I want to get more engaged and more involved so that these incidences and these occurrences don't occur again. But we can prevent them from occurring, or at least prevent the effects of them from being so detrimental to all communities by unifying and addressing these problems that will have a long-term impact. To just give you an example, some of you may remember Ike. There are residents in Black and brown communities who are still addressing the Ike issue. Ike was 10, 12 years ago. And there are folks who are still trying to recover from that. I could go on and on and on. The conversation surrounding climate change, environmental justice, and the communities that are impacted by it is nationwide. But we're here. We're here in our efforts to make sure that we address those issues. From my perspective, and I'm only speaking from my perspective in regard to this, as a preacher, all lives matter. All lives matter. The one thing that we do, we do here at COCO, we don't see race, we don't see nationality, we don't see color, we don't see belief systems, we don't see gender, we see a life. and we try to preserve that life to the best of our ability and to the best of our knowledge. Now, some residents in our region not only are hit harder by disasters, but they also receive less of the resources that affords them the ability to recover. That should not happen. It should not exist. But I saw it firsthand. You know, the Red Cross and the other entities, United Way, to come into the community. They were few and far between them. In some cases, we never saw them at all, and that's what led a lot of nonprofits, smaller nonprofits in the community, such as COCO and others, to go out and do the work, go out and provide the resources that were needed. You know, and researchers indicate the federal disaster assistance policies tend to place vulnerable groups at a disadvantage and reduce their ability to access resources and assistance for recovery. Now, I'm not saying that. That's what the researchers say in regard to the federal government itself. And as a result, you know, many people are impacted by disasters and that can last more, longer, several years, and the time to recover from these events is more devastating than it would be with the fewest resources that are available or not available to a community for recovery. Now, at the University of Pittsburgh found that whites accumulated more wealth after a natural disaster between 1999 and 2013. White residents of color, white residents, oh, wow, while residents of color accumulated less. You know, even after controlling for a variety of demographic and household factors, Harris County itself, the disaster-related increase in the Black-white wealth gap, you know, increased or average, let's just say 87,000 per household. I mean, that's a huge gap, you know, after a natural disaster. You know, and if we don't recognize, we fail to recognize or acknowledge or even address, you know, the racist components to this, along with the political components and all the other factors. One must be willing to confront those issues and address them and try to provide resources, information, knowledge, and solutions to those communities that are being impacted. When we go into our community, when I go into our community and we talk about climate change, we talk about environmental justice, we talk about all of the other buzzwords that we use, and for the most part, they don't even understand what it means. They don't know what you're saying to them. They understand that the problem is wrong, that there are issues that need to be addressed from an environmental standpoint. But when you mention environmental justice or climate change, they generally think in terms of what the weather's like today as compared to what it's going to be like tomorrow. You know, they don't see the overall impact of climate change. So that information, that education, and connecting our communities to those resources are instrumental. They're very, very important so that the community understands why they're experiencing what they're going to and what they can anticipate to experience in the future, as far as the next year and the years following that. Now, what do Houston communities need to adapt to climate change? I just focused on most of them. You need to be able to address the community's perspective. In other words, sharing with them, teaching them, guiding them, instructing them, providing resources and information to them that will enable them not to hold your hand, but to put their own shoes on and pants, and from a community perspective, address the issues and concerns. But that's been difficult when the lack of resources, and as I stated previously, even the federal government and other agencies don't necessarily provide the resources that a community needs in order to recover. That also can include some job opportunities as well. We look at what we're going through now, and it's just June, the heat wave. Yeah, I mean, I've never seen nothing like this. I'm a native Houstonian. I ain't seen that like 5 days of 100 degrees weather, 6 degrees of 100-degree weather. I haven't seen like that. And I'm pretty long in the tooth, so I've been around a while. But the point I'm simply making is why? Why is that? And what impact does that have on our disabled, our elderly, our shut in, and the poor in general who can't afford air conditioning or fans, and in some cases can't even pay their bills, their light bills and the like. So what COCO is doing is trying to address that concern. Yeah, we're frontline. Yeah, we're in the community, and not just Fifth Ward community. We're in communities in and around Houston, from the south side to the northwest, to the north side, as well as the east end as well. So we try to provide as much information, as much education, and as many resources as we possibly can. Some of you on this call know that I'll call you in a heartbeat if I don't know the answer to a question, or if I need some information, or be connected to a resource that would help alleviate some of the stress and strain on our communities. We look at a Uri, the winter storm. Say, once again, I'm a native. I never seen nothing like that. That's not the type of weather we get down south, especially here in Houston, Texas. But what's the impact of that? And what is the overall cause of that? Why is there a Uri? Did something change over the past decade or decades that created this scenario for a Uri to take place? It creates this scenario for Harvey to take place. How do we educate a community to not see today and tomorrow, but to see decades past and what their future, or what we would desire their future to be like in the decades that precede us? As I mentioned, COCO helped a lot of families doing Harvey. We helped a lot of families doing Uri, but we didn't do this alone. We worked with other nonprofits and other organizations to try to offer that assistance that, for the most part, the state, federal governments, all of the above, city and county, and sometimes did not provide. But during that process, we didn't just repair a home or pay a light bill or we tried to educate them too. We tried to help them to understand why your neighborhood floods. Why is the air quality in your neighborhood poor? Well, why is there lead in your water? We want to educate our communities so that they will have enough desire and willingness to take on and to challenge those that are elected and those who are decision makers. I inform my community and all communities all the time, elected officials, we don't work for them. They work for us, and we have to hold them accountable for the damage, the pain, the misery, the suffering that we see, that we endure, that we go through. Now, lastly, what does the community need? What needs to happen before the next flooding event, before the next natural disaster or man-made disaster that occurs in our communities? I have 3 things here I'd like to share in regard to that. And the first thing is invest money into the most vulnerable communities to prevent flooding. Now, most of the time we look at money as going to our purses, our back pockets, but a lot of time the money is your time, your willingness to come, to get to know, to communicate with, and to offer assistance in helping a community to prevent the impact of a flooding disaster, natural disaster, or man-made disaster. So that's the first thing that a community needs to help them endure better, be able to overcome a flooding, a natural disaster event. Invest in weatherizing homes to help protect our seniors and others from heat, extreme weather, and to keep down energy costs. In my community, as well as several other Black and brown communities, we have old wood frame homes, what we used to refer to as shotgun homes. I mean, some of you may know what I'm talking about. That still exists, and they're still being rented out. The weatherization of those homes doesn't exist. The cost to put an air conditioned unit in, we get them donated, and we try to get it to our seniors and our disabled and our single parents, with children, to try to alleviate the heat that can create even further medical issues for especially those who are on oxygen and the like. We haven't even gotten to the electric aspect of it in the middle of a storm. Those seniors and disabled who are on oxygen, who need electricity in our communities. And once again, we're talking about the most vulnerable in our community. Last but not least, how do we make it easier for vulnerable communities to access resources? That is our part of our mission statement here. Our mission statement basically states, and I'm gonna paraphrase, to inform, educate, and connect our communities to the resources that they need that will help to improve their quality way of life. That's what it is. When you live in, and I don't want to elaborate on this too long, I want to take time in case anybody has any questions. We live in a community where the average income is about $32,000, $35,000 a year. That's average income. Now, there are some higher, some lower, but how do you manage to treat your child with lead poisoning, or has asthma, or any of the other healthcare issues? And then your teenage son or daughter, who there are no job opportunities, no training opportunities in there, that can help them and assist them to be a part and help lift up their own community. I focus on Fifth Ward because I'm a resident up there. I grew up there. I've seen the deterioration of it over the years. It was a vibrant, alive, connected community. And now it's a little bit, it's been torn apart. And what we have left, we're going to do our best to make sure that we sustain that and keep that. And I know that same mindset is about, should exist with each and every one of you. You know your roots, you know where you grew up in, and you know where you are now. Now, that mindset should be to maintain and sustain your quality way of life. In the process of doing so in your community, you also lift up the quality of life for others in that same community. So that's my little spiel for this evening. As I said, there's so much that discussion that needs to take place from a political perspective, from a community perspective, from an advocacy, nonprofit perspective. All of those need to be brought to the table. Our motto here is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we try to get our communities to have that seat at the table, to voice their opinions and make choices that they would like to see take place in their communities. I'm done. If anyone has any questions, I'll do my best to try to address.
Thank you so much, Rev, for that testimony and explaining why you do the work that you do. I think it's so important. I think Peter might have been the first one that's got his hand up.
Thank you, Reverend. You've led us through some of the needs of our most vulnerable communities and through ideas about educating our friends so they can help themselves recover as we give them a hand up. My focus is often about devoting resources to stopping the carbon emissions from use of fossil fuel and in confronting the monumental forces that seek to keep business as usual in place to continue the path of pollution as we live it now. These two ideas can be simplified in my mind to the needs of the here and the now and the needs of the future necessary to keep the planet from becoming an unlivable place. What are your thoughts, sir, on how we address these two climate fights? And how do we decide where to best spend our energies? Thank you.
Thank you. You know, first of all, let me say this. If I don't know that cyanide is in the Kool-Aid, then I drink it. Okay. So I think the first step is going into our communities and making them aware of the carbon danger, you know, and the particular villain, plant or whatever it may be that's causing that, and allowing them to see the overall big picture, not just here, but the impact that it has on them when you connect the dots from housing to income inequality to healthcare, you know, infrastructure, all of the above. So yeah, that's where it begins. I would say if I don't know that there's cyanide in the Kool-Aid, I'm gonna drink it and I will die. Hope that answered your question.
I think Elena, you're next.
Thank you, Reverend, for all you said. I thought it was incredible. I wanted to ask, I feel like aside just from education, countering misinformation is also really important to being able to effectively advocate in all communities, but especially marginalized communities. And I wanted to know if you had any advice or any experience on how to counter, for example, false information put out there by oil companies, or information that minimizes the impact of climate change, saying it's going to happen in 100 years, impacts are never going to come within our lifetime, which we know isn't true. We're kind of living them now. But yeah, I wanted to know your experience, your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Misinformation is prevalent now in our society, in our country, and in our world. It's imperative, and that's why all of you are here. That's why we have these discussions, to make sure that we get the information and that we get it correct, and that we're able to share that information and debunk those. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. UP, Union Pacific out there, we're dealing with creosote issue in Fifth Ward. We've done testing, we provided the data, EPA has done some things, and the city has done some things, and they continuously send out false information, to the public, and they deny it. How we're able to overcome that, once again, is to educate our communities and provide them with the information, the knowledge, and the understanding of why and who and what they can do about it. Now, we will always have misinformation, because those who have, want to keep. And they will do anything to keep. In regard to UP and some of the other on the East End over here, petroleum companies, these are multi-billion-dollar corporations. And always keep in mind, it's always about the dollar. And because they are multi-billion-dollar corporations, they will fight you tooth and nail, and they know that they have enough money to outlast you. So remember this, and this is the old cliche from the 60s, the struggle continues. Just because we have a small victory here, the war continues. So keep that in mind. The struggle continues, and do the best that you can to debunk false information, because it's going to be prevalent. I hope that answered your question or your concern.
Thank you. It did.
I think we might have time for one more question if there's any more thoughts on this topic for Reverend Caldwell.
Someone did ask if he could reshare where those maps are. I don't know if he saw that message.
Yeah, I did, and thank you, Yeah, those maps are Ms. Thomas, Dr. Thomas has those maps. And of course, I think she'll be more than happy to share that. And of course, you can always feel free to contact us as well at COCO. I will put my information in the chat upon having to leave. And I sincerely apologize because I really want to hear the rest of this conversation, and be a part of this event. But I will share my information. And of course, Ms. Thomas has shared hers. Dr. Thomas has shared hers. And please feel free to text her. Doc, Dr. Thomas, you want to address that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I did put in the chat a link to the book where those maps exist. And yeah, if you're interested and don't feel like buying a book, let me know and I can help get that information to you.
And I think that would apply to all that's on the call. I've kind of generalized a lot of things here this evening, but it's all supported by data. It's not, there's no false information here. It may be somewhat generalized because I say the picture and the scope is much bigger than what we see or what we perceive. And the fight itself is continuous. So my support and encouragement to each and every one of you, and just keep going. Don't stop. And I think the most important aspect of what we do is making sure that we build a next generation that follows us to continue and this struggle and prevent what we've already seen, what we've already experienced, the next generation from having to experience and go through that. So continue to struggle. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's sometimes heartening and also sometimes heartbreaking to work with our elders who have been in this fight for 50 years already. And we see the youth who are just now picking up the torch. And so it's carrying on. It's a shame that it has to carry on, that we haven't been successful yet, but the powers that be are enormous. And it's going to take all of us intergenerationally to continue to carry this torch. So thank you all for what you've done.